All right, folks. Hopefully you all have some Duck Duck Goose in your hand. I had some and finished it. Looks like you're moving on.
I've been drinking lager all night. You accused me of being drunk, so I'm trying to be sober.
I think you're doing a great job of it.
Emphasis on trying.
So, Tommy, this is your first Foeder for Thought.
It is my first Foeder for Thought. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
What do you think of it so far?
It's an excellent podcast. No, I'm sorry. No. That's one of my least favorite things on the planet is people when they get on their podcast, and we've talked about this in the past. It's like, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it to be here, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. What do I think of it? This is an awesome town, and this venue is unbelievable. I would drink here every night. So cheers to Chris and the team. This is a rad place to drink beer. Yeah,
you and I were, we were just sort of chatting about, I guess, sort of what makes a scene in some ways, comparing, the very mature scene in California with a scene here that is, by comparison or relatively speaking, a little bit younger, and how the dynamics of that play out. And I don't know, there's in St. Pete specifically, I just find a density around this kind of stuff, and it all has to do with, I guess, the players involved and their priorities and the personal passions they have and what they carry through into a place and how that affects everybody around them. And there's only so many places in the country, and maybe no one quite like this, where you've got a fridge that looks like that in Webb City Cellar. And this is one of the places every year I get to come that I look forward to as much as if I were actually in Belgium in a lot of ways. It has that kind of uniqueness to it. For somebody like yourself who's been exposed to these kinds of beers, you've been a producer for a long time, you've been in a very mature and diverse scene in California. What do you see, I guess, between the two places? I mean, you've only been here for a moment in a microcosm, so not to put too much emphasis on it, but I mean, what are some of the things that sort of catch your eye?
I think when it comes, for me, very simply, it's like when I drink beer out on the road, because, at home there's places, but God, when you go out on the road and you start drinking and you feel comfortable, that's it. That's everything. And this patio, this courtyard is unbelievable. Both buildings are really cool. I can appreciate what Webb looks like, and it's nice and air-conditioned and this building here, but I wouldn't drink anywhere but this patio if I was here. This is amazing. And the beers are incredible. The space is great. And why wouldn't you want to drink in this environment? And there's just nothing like that. I mean, we don't have anything like this in San Diego. It's incredible. With all due apologies to those breweries with large beer gardens, I'm sorry.
It is an unusual combination of a very chill environment, but very, somewhat serious beers. That's not always the combination you get.
I think it's important to remember that what makes a great beer environment is the people, and the space is defined by the people. And clearly this space is defined by the people that are drinking tonight. So, yeah. I think that's everything.
Let's talk about the genesis or the inspiration for you as a Wild Ale producer and someone who just loves Saison. You love fruited sours. These things are very, very kind of deep in your bones as a producer that was really early on these things in the U.S. A lot of folks kind of trace their inspiration back to a specific experience in Belgium or a specific beer they had somewhere. Where does that moment go for you? If you trace it all the way back, is there a light switch that went on at some point for you?
So you have to know I'm a really picky eater, and it's a really important distinction because I'm not known to be this incredibly diverse palate. But I remember the first beer that I had that made me just go, holy crap, and that was Rodenbach, and it was such a departure from anything that I'd ever experienced, other than I really love dill pickles, and that's important because that's it's sour and it's vinegar and there's things, but Rodenbach was an amazing beer. And it wasn't something that I expected, nor had I been chasing. And I think chasing's a big part of what people do these days. And I was just on my beer journey, and it was the first time a sour beer had been opened up for me. And I was like, my God, that is so different. It's incredible. Nowadays, people chase sour as a flavor, and they're looking for the best thing. But if you can go kind of harken back to the first time you had a sour aha moment, a lot of people in this room, this environment, probably would have a similar, kind of conversation. But I just remember that as being very seminal, and it was an old world beer. It was not something new. It just was something so profoundly different that it was incredible.
Do you remember where you had it?
I was actually at a friend's house in Coronado, California. So I was house sitting at the time. I might have raided his beer fridge. I also will point out that I had two other pretty seminal beer moments. One was the first ever Guinness that I ever had, and the first ever Chimay Red that I had. They were all and they're all tied to flavor, and I think that was really important. Was that they're all more flavorful than anything that beer had ever been. So those are kind of important distinctions.
What is it about being a picky eater that connects, that informs why you like those beers? Because when people say they're a picky eater, they usually mean they're a very narrow set of things that they like, but and often usually not adventurous. But that doesn't seem to be what happened with beer.
No, I think it was interesting for me because when I say I'm a picky eater, there's a lot of things I don't like because they're too over the top. Like I hate bell peppers. I hate raw onion. I don't drink coffee. There's a lot of things that people enjoy in life, and I'm just not into those things. But part of being a picky eater is knowing what you do and you don't like. Mm-hmm. And so when you run into things that are sour and flavorful and well done, you can appreciate that they're part of a spectrum. And I just happen to not like certain things on the spectrum. Not that I'm on the spectrum, mind you.
What have you learned about, over the course of producing these beers yourself, what have you learned about your own palate in terms of like the things you do and don't like in these kinds of beers? Do you think your palate influences what you make?
Absolutely. I was just talking to Chris out there. Two seconds before I came on stage, I got a glass of lager, and we were discussing smoked beers, and I fucking hate smoked beers, which is only really interesting to me because my dad's favorite beers are smoked beers. So, it's not a product of space, right? It's not like familial. My dad loves to drink Alaskan smoked porter, and while I can appreciate it for what it is, you won't catch me ordering one at a bar. So, yeah, I think it's just about knowing what you like and then being in tune with that. And if anything, I think I've learned over the years that what I'm in tune with, I can use to my advantage. And so you asked about sour beer and wild beers and sort of saisons and things. My palate gravitates to them, and I think that that's pretty cool. But I don't chase things that I don't like, and so you won't see me making a smoked beer anytime soon. One
thing that I often wonder for people who are really in tune with their palate and are kind of like hyper aware of it, we always assume we all see the same colors because we can point to them and say that's green or that's blue. But then over time, we actually start to debate the nuances of those colors sometimes, and we can't tell, and one person's green is another one's blue, so far as to there is actual color blindness. And so I often wonder when it comes to palates if the things that we like, we both love saison, but I have no idea if we both love the same things about saison or the same things in them, or if we get what we want, if we're getting different things and that's what attracts us. When it comes to like something like Duck Duck Goose, what is it that you like? What are the peaks in that flavor experience that you're trying to nail, and sort of what are you tacking towards in the design of that beer that is your sense understanding of what a goose is?
So I appreciate the question, but I want to go back real quick because it's really important to talk about what you asked, which was how do we know that we like the same things in saison? So I know for a fact that there's a lot of phenolics in Belgian yeast. I also happen to know that there's a lot of phenolics in German Weiss yeast. And so I love phenolics in beer, but I don't necessarily love phenolics in Weiss beer because it comes with banana and fruity esters and things that are different than the Belgian side. So I lean very heavily into, I'm okay with phenolics in beer, but I don't love them at a super high level. I love that sense of that there's a phenolic presence there, but then I don't necessarily love Weiss yeast for being phenolic and fruity, whereas I do prize wit beer yeast and saison yeast for being phenolic and more peppery and also being very dry. To be clear, that doesn't mean that I don't love and hate esters. It just means that I appreciate phenolics and yeast and what they bring to the table. Now, our Duck Duck is an interesting beer because what I wanted to do was bring an American sense of 1 and 2 and 3 year old beer on a blend to the conversation. But I didn't necessarily want it to be purely Belgian in its makeup. And so a lot of what I think has come to be the hallmark of our Duck Duck is that it's always some of the best barrels that we have. Sometimes we hold barrels back for being very interesting, but interesting doesn't necessarily mean that they're great on their own, but they might blend together really well. And the whole goal is to make something from 3, 1, 2, and 3 versus singularly a blend of something in-house. So we try, when we blend Duck Duck, to find things that have really unique expressions by year, and hopefully those things really work well together.
When you say the Belgian expression, what would you characterize as that?
The challenge, and I think this is something that we've always really towed the edge on, is that we want to homage to the level of things that the Belgians have done, but we've never tried to recreate that specifically. And our interest has always been to make something that emulates the experience but has a sense of us involved in it. It'd be very easy to sort of trace how they go about it and what they do exactly, but our Duck Ducks and some of our other beers don't really trace to that singular moment. They're not built the same way. They're built as a part of the experience. They're not built from, this is how they do it there and we're going to try to recreate it here.
Can you give me a brief, might be the wrong word here, but how would you describe the way in which Duck Duck is built?
You just asked me to be brief, to be clear, right?
I was afraid of my own questions.
You're afraid of your own questions. It's good. So there's only really been one real parameter with Duck Duck over the years, and that it's always had to be from 1 and 2 and 3-year-old beer. Mm-hmm. Historically, in Belgian Goose, the 3-year-old beer would be sort of the least part of it, might be 10%. The 2-year-old might be a bigger part of it, 20, 30%, and then they might need much more of the 1-year-old, and that's a lot of it has to do with the re-fermentation, needing the sugars and things to carry the effervescence. But we've never had that as a demonstrative. We've never said that's absolute. We don't need 10% of this and this and this. So the blend is always kind of based on what's available to us. And so if we taste a bunch of great 3-year-old beers, we might use more 3-year-old barrels than 2-year-old barrels.
So those proportions will change year to year? Absolutely,
and they're not set in stone, and we don't even approach it from that level. We literally just say, okay, what do we have in 1-year-old land, 2-year-old land, and 3-year-old land? In our basis, most of it comes back to 2-year because there's some very interesting things that happen in 2-year land. You've got some really well-conditioned things. You've also got some emerging flavors, maybe more oak and stuff, but at the same time, you're not beholden to a quality of a ratio. And if you speak to a ratio, you're probably going to miss. So we've never gone down that path. We also have multiple different types of yellow, sour, blonde beer at the brewery. Some are heavily wheated, some are lager-based, some are stronger, some are not. So all we've ever done is just gone out to the farm and said, we're sampling all of them. What do we have? What do we like? And then from that, how much gallons do we need to get home on this? And do we have the right pieces to do that?
I would imagine that at some point in that process, you are constrained by how much you have and what you can do in that final proportion. If you find that you don't have enough of 2 or 3 to get where you want, do you make less of it overall in order to hit the proportion you want, or do you start with the constraint and blend towards that?
So we've always said that the most important thing we need to understand is what kind of volume are we chasing, and then that's the 1A, and the 1B is we never blend a volume, which means if we don't have it, we don't chase it. So if it needs 1,000, 1,500 gallons, we have it, we can go home. But if we don't have it and we only have 1,200, then we're going there. But we never go from 1,200 to 1,500 and toss things in just to get to that number, because that devalues the experience.
So is your total volume from year to year, does it fluctuate based on what's available to mix then?
It's never absolute, and it's based upon part sales, part guesstimate, part understanding of what we want to do. We've never actually made the same amount of beer in that world, so it's like, this is what we think the universe needs. That's what we're going to chase. And if there's a little bit left over, we might put some in kegs, but for the most part, it's a sense of where we're living.
One of the things I've always been fascinated by with you as a producer is that you've worked through distinct brands over time, all of which are concurrent, and really are kind of compartmentalized, it seems like, in terms of what they are, what they stand for, and I can imagine what it must be like to conceptualize within them. So there's there's Lost Abbey and Port,
Hop Concept.
Say it again.
Hop Concept.
Hop Concept. Yep. Tiny Bubbles.
Yep.
Is that right?
And we have a new hard tea brand.
Hard tea brand. Yep. You've never been afraid to sort of stretch out into new categories, new brands, new sort of streams of thought is what they feel like to me, because they all feel very fully conceptualized. What is it like to be sort of a single point amongst all of those things? Because I would imagine some of them have distinct teams as well, but you're kind of the single connector between a lot of that.
I do want to state very unequivocally that we're not great at all of them. If we're great at one of them, we're great at Lost Abbey, more so than anything, because I think it's got the most development. That being said, there's reasons that we do them, and there's probably should be reasons that we should kill them. Not many breweries have the level of brands that we do at our size, but we're trying to find the right message. We're trying to find the right home, and some of these things just don't fall into the bucket. And the buckets, the bucket is big and the bucket is small. And so, I think for me, when we started with Port Brewing brands and Lost Abbey brands, we wanted to make sure that the lane never kind of crossed over, and maybe that's why we have too many brands today, or more than we should. But at the same time, if you don't define the lane, you lose track of why you're doing it.
Sure. Tiny Bubbles struck me as something that had a really unique insight behind it, potentially, of what the audience for sour beer or wild fermentation or these things could be. But looked at through an entirely different lens. Can you tell me a little bit about what was the conceptual thinking there in the development of Tiny Bubbles?
So, just so the audience knows, we're making a live sour canned beer called Tiny Bubbles. It's a Goza style beer, but it's got Brettanomyces, and it's not a kettle sour. It's something that we were asked to do by sales. We were asked to make something that fit the market, and it was really important for me on a visceral level that we didn't compromise the Lost Abbey brand. Something that we've worked really hard over the last 16 years to build with a lot of integrity and a lot of high value worth proposition. And so they wanted a fruited sour canned beer, and I said, okay, you can have that. It's going to be live. It's not going to be kettle soured, but it's not going to have the Lost Abbey brand on it, although it does carry the message on the back of the can that says, produced by the people from Lost Abbey. It's important because we're here today because we're the Lost Abbey. We're not here today because we're Port Brewing, Tiny Bubbles, Hop Concept. We're here because of Lost Abbey. And if you want me to make something that doesn't look or taste like Lost Abbey, then I need a reason for it to sit over here and not sit at the same table. And they're both great beers, but they're not from the same. They're not from the same house. And the same family, yes, but not the same house.
Yeah, it struck me as a really unique product in the world of. I mean, it hit the market at a really unique time when things were really splintering really quickly around hard seltzers and things like that, and it carried a little bit of a refreshment kind of vibe to it. It looked light and easy to drink, like a champagne or something, and it was fun looking. But knowing how much, integrity the liquid itself had was sort of it was so much better than it had to be.
Yeah.
But it was what was my feeling on it. I was like, oh my God.
That's a really funny observation because my head brewer has asked, why are all four of the recipes super unique? And that's the integrity that you speak to, and it's something that we've been challenged by. Why isn't it one base beer with a bunch of flavorings? And I think Jason said earlier something to the effect of purees and concentrates or otherwise. And each one of the Tiny Bubbles, and there's 4 different ones, each one of them has a unique recipe. It's not one giant tank of beer with 4 different sets of natural flavors, even though the market probably would be okay if it was.
Certainly. It sounds like in those mix of brands that you've been party to over those years, it sounds like Lost Abbey is maybe closest to your heart. I don't know. Would you say is it the one you hope has the most longevity of all of those? How would what is your relationship like with some of them? Well,
they're all my children, and most of them are bastards. But no, I do. I really appreciate that we have all the opportunities that we have. But I'll say this out loud because it's really important. I get off the plane in Brussels and I walk into Cantillon. They know that we're the guys that make Lost Abbey.
Yeah.
And when we do, we walk through the front door and they open their arms and they're happy to see us because of our homage to Belgium or our Belgian sensibility. There isn't a brewery in Belgium that we can't walk into and carry our head high because of the quality of liquid that we're making or the quality of the beer and our appreciation of Belgium. And so, Lost Abbey is a big deal. in my world, but it's not singular. It actually doesn't pay our bills, but it defines who we are relative to the 9,000 other breweries in this country.
It makes sense to me. I mean, it's not a unique thing for Lost Abbey to experience, but like the market for these, especially far away from home, has become almost impossible for most brands. And it seems like in recent years in California, you've sort of expanded the footprint of Lost Abbey through hospitality, rather than shipping them, so much across the country to markets like Chicago. It's very difficult to find those things anymore. So, what has the role of the hospitality expansions that you've gone? You've opened up new places in different cities and sort of extended your hand that way. What is the role of hospitality for you? Beyond just having a place to sell these beers, but what does it give you that you didn't have before that's really important to the future of that brand?
I think this is a great example of the same thing that we're going through, which is that you need forward-facing. If you're going to make these kinds of beers and you're going to sell them to people, you need to be able to connect the dots at a 1A, 1B level. Like, it's really hard to do through a third tier because there's just not enough time and enough amount of time to tell the story. And so our hospitality department, now we have 3 satellite tasting rooms as well as the brewery itself. So 4 different places you can buy our beer on premise, own premise they call it, is hugely important because the people behind the bar can stop long enough to explain how this thing came to be and why it's $40 a bottle and why it's important. But our Lost Abbey name is actually our forward-facing thing for the entire brewery right now. So while we pour Port Brewing and Hop Concept and Tiny Bubbles at all of the locations, they're all branded Lost Abbey.
So that's the front-facing brand for the hospitality, the retail spot.
And it has been since nearly day one. Yeah, I mean, we've always been leading with Lost Abbey because in the market it's super strong and different, and it defines the quality of our beer and the other stuff that we're doing, the hoppy things, and there's lager and all that, but that is all market beer versus what we do. And when you say Lost Abbey and you say Duck Duck Goose, it comes from one place.
Yeah. I mean, it's a bit new for U.S. makers to be thinking that way, mostly because laws are permitting it, and they've gotten easier over the years. California is great because it gives you, I think it was like 5 licenses per brewery
6.
last time. 6 now.
6, yeah.
Which is an incredible opportunity to expand exactly that way as the market tightened up through distribution and became harder to penetrate. But it's not unusual. I mean, you go to Belgium and you'll find, a lot of these brewers have cafes led by their most prestigious brand or by the brand that connects with that area, and the other brands get to come along behind that. It's actually kind of a traditional business model when it comes to these kinds of beers.
And I'm not a genius for doing it. I'm just a follower. No, it's interesting. Our tasting rooms, we have 20, 25 beers on tap, and there's 5 different brands. They're all really well built, and for the most part, if you come in and you're a Hop Concept fan and that's what you want to drink, that's fine. We can be forward-facing, but forward-facing should be hospitality-based, and the Belgian people, that's what they do. You go to a cafe, it doesn't matter who owns the cafe. It is a lot of hospitality, and it's really impressive. So I like what we have. I like being 25, 30 beers on tap, and we own all of them. I think it's really cool.
Do you personally take well to the hospitality sort of infrastructure? It seems like a lot to handle for, if you I don't know if you had experience in that before, but if your heart was in the brew house, handling hospitality, especially multiple locations, is a pretty big stretch for a lot of folks.
It is. I think that for me, I've always been on that, like I'm sitting up here tonight, I'm doing the education stuff. I love to talk about beer, and I love to talk about why our beer is different. And so if I can convince our staff to pull that in naturally, which I think they do a good job of, it's very easy to do what we do because our beer leads with flavor, and it leads with great flavor and world-class beers. And so, imagine opening a tasting room and handing a set of people a whole portfolio of really good beer and then just telling them to be authentic and honest and be like, this is good stuff, and not have to sling bad things. And it's pretty easy to watch them do their job. So.
I mean, even prior to COVID, which was a unique challenge for hospitality, we've seen a number of brands try to expand through satellite tap rooms and increasing their footprint through hospitality, and many of them just sort of falling right off a cliff when they tried to do that. It's not as easy as just opening the door. What do you think it takes to be successful at that approach to the business?
I've always said that the death of any brewery is the wrong satellite tasting room, meaning that the next one's supposed to save you. And I think we've been smart about it. Like most of our tasting rooms away from the brewery have not been overly designed to be huge and big and overly experiential or bombastic in a way that like almost over excels for the brand. They're basically built to be points of impression, and so they're not huge revenue drivers, but they're built to be community centers, and they have small footprints. And the whole thing is to say, you're not familiar with us, but we're gonna be part of this community, and we've been really good about that. I think that the challenge is that most people that try to build satellites overproject, and they're just wrong. And then when they're wrong, they're really wrong.
Yeah. How important do you think that piece of the business, the hospitality side, is going to be for this category of beers over the long term? Because it seems like it's kind of maybe it's hit a plateau in terms of awareness and interest in that. And we've mentioned multiple times tonight that we've seen things like Natty Wine just kind of take off with the wind at their backs. Is hospitality a key to that? Are there other keys to that going forward that we should be cultivating?
I saw a thing the other day that said that brew pubs are actually on the rise again. It's the whole sense of like smaller on-premise. This is the only place you can get it. That'd be really interesting if all of a sudden the whole model went from garage brewery to got to get in line for 4-packs and things. But like somewhere in here, yeah, we're about to see another shift. If there's anything about the beer industry that we know to be true, it always shifts. Maybe it's like a sailboat in the ocean. You always got to find the right wind. But yeah, it feels like there's another shift coming, and everybody that thought that building the garage brewery and everybody will come to you, but I don't know, maybe now all of a sudden it's back to experiential with some food and things. I don't have the answer, but I do think that there's another shift coming.
Does the fact that Lost Abbey doesn't necessarily pay the bills for the overall organization keep some pressure off of it having to change in a ways it may not want to?
I think the good news for me is that I feel like the good news is that we've never made it the lead driver. And as not being the lead horse, we've never been beholden to the market condition. It's not been easy to be focused on the higher premium, super premium piece. Although nowadays lots of people went uphill to try to get there and then have decided that it's not a place they want to live because they've got so many other places to be. But the Abbey brand has always lived in the super premium world. And at that point, I think that we've defined that's what we're really good at. We don't have a lead Abbey brand that we have to grow by 10% a year in order to be successful. We have other things in the portfolio that we can focus on. So the Abbey brand gets to just be its own artistic sense, and for that I'm very thankful.
And according to its own desires, how has it changed over the course of its existence for you? Like, what are some of the, I guess, sort of the milestone, the milestones in that evolution of the brand?
So it's been a brand for 16 years now. We opened up originally, it was all cork finished, 750 milliliter, some draft. Then we started doing some smaller batch things. It's gone, now we're into some canned stuff. But we've never deviated from the really strong sense of why we're here today, which is that the Lost Abbey barrel beer program is one of the best in this country. At least if you ask me, which you just did, or at least I just told you. Why we're here tonight is because we're part of this great barrel beer community, and we make other amazing Lost Abbey beers that are in the market. Half of them people in this room may not know about, but that time they're not carrying a lot of our sales. But we're always going to be Lost Abbey. We're always going to have this great barrel program. And that's okay. If that's all we do, and that's a very fraction of the totality, it's great because we're always going to be important for making those beers.
Yeah. What have you had today that turned your head a little bit?
I've had a lot of lager today. What turned my head today was the Tilken Gewürztraminer beer, which I apologize because it's one of the very few things that I had because I didn't drink a lot of the stuff from that from the bin over there. And Tim's back there somewhere, but the Oxbow, the main grown was the nose on that was incredible, and I don't know. I did not drink a lot of today's beers. I was drinking a lot of the beers from the host family because we're here. So, and I love everything that's on the list, but
Yeah, we got about 15 minutes. We can make up some time.
We're just gonna drink some Dre Fontaine out of the bottle. It's fine. Yeah.
Does anybody have a question for Tommy that they'd like to ask?
No, nobody has any questions.
Let's see. Anybody over here? All right. Well, I think that's. I think we can call it a night.
Well, we're gonna bring Chris up here to kick this. Come on, come finish this out. Come on.
I appreciate you being our last interview of the day and the holding strong. Thanks for having us, man.
Thank you, Tommy. Thank you, Michael. Appreciate it. What a
going strong.
What a gauntlet that you were just put yourself through.
Hey, I got to step off and get some beers this year, which was a dramatic improvement, and also worked against some of my other goals, which was to be cogent until the very end. But I think it came together just right. We're sliding across the finish line.
Speaking of cogency, I believe you did pretty well.
Thank you.
I do know that early on there was some discussion about
I've interviewed
Tommy
this man before
being present for the interview. And Tommy, I think you were here. I think you nailed it.
fully.
Okay.
All right.
I do want to point out that Michael and I did an interview at the Hop Leaf, right? Is
That's
that the
right.
one?
You don't even remember, do you?
Is that the one? Might have come in a little hot that night. Nah, I don't know.
That's not to say it wasn't
It was fun.
very enjoyable.
Yeah. It's sometimes the Lenny Bruce kicks in. I don't know. It's it was a long day.
It was a great episode.
Not today. You can check it. I'm sure that's on the website somewhere now. Yeah.
Yep.
So I tried to be present tonight. More present. Equally as present. Equally as present. Yeah. Sorry. Anyways, my wife's watching. So.
Well, so we are going to wrap this thing up. I want to thank you guys so much for being here. As obviously, I'm very thankful for you guys equally. I'm very thankful for all of you guys coming. Our staff killed it tonight.
Killed it.
Right? Fucking killed it. Thank you guys. I also want to thank So this week has been awesome and very difficult at the same time, right? It was actually sort of nice to have a year off. I know that sounds crazy, but man, this week takes a lot out of us. I want to thank Kristen, my partner. She's over here. I want to thank you for putting up with me all week. I want to thank you for putting up with me for every beer week. I know it's very difficult on our family, and from that perspective, I actually want to thank not just our staff, but I want to thank our staff's families who put up with this week as well, who spend a lot of time and energy not just with us when we get home late, but also are here even tonight, many of them pouring for us. Many of the people that poured you beers tonight were just volunteers. They were family members of ours. They were our brothers, our sisters, our wives. And it means a lot to me that so many people have come together for us to enjoy this yet again. So not just a thank you to our families, but to you guys. And man, I'm really looking forward to being able to do this every year. I really am. As hard as I hate this week sometimes, I love this week. And I love you guys. And Mike, thank you for being here.
That's a homecoming. Wouldn't miss it.